Thank you so much for tuning in to episode 100 of The Lead on News 24. In studio, to start off and kick off this edition, we've got our editor-in-chief at News 24, Adriaan Basson. Adriaan, how are you?
I feel a bit like Jock Callis or Hashim Amla here, 100 not out. It's a fantastic day. I'm so proud of the show and of our listeners and of our journalists who've stepped forward to speak to you every weekday for 4 days of the week on The Lead. And yeah, just very proud of that we've made this show possible and for all the support we've received.
What was the initial idea starting The Lead in the beginning? We've seen these, really great news podcasts overseas, all about telling good investigative journalism, telling those stories that matter, bringing a voice to the journalists out there. I think we've achieved that so far. 600,000 listens.
Yeah, look, News 24 is obviously known for its quality journalism and specifically for written journalism, but we also know that audio and video are very growing formats, rapidly growing. Specifically podcasts, news podcasts are very popular these days, but there's a lot of nonsense out there. There's a lot of podcasts on YouTube, etc., that isn't dealing with facts. It's not proper journalism where people don't check their facts and, ask for comment, etc. So what we've gone for is really quality journalism that you expect on News 24, but in audio format, with a trusted, experienced broadcaster journalist like yourself, Graeme Raubenheimer, to host a show, someone who knows what he's talking about and knows how to get the best out of our journalists. I often feel like we should present our journalists more to our readers so that they know who is Carol Paton, who's Peter de Tooy, who is Sikunati Manchancha, what drives them and what got them to write certain stories. So I hope our readers and our listeners feel that they know the News 24 team a bit more. And please tell us, do you want to hear more of our journalists? Do you want to hear from newsmakers themselves? What would you like to see on the show going forward? We'd love to get that feedback.
Barring yourself in the episode, your favorite episode on The Lead thus far, just to end off?
It's very hard. You're putting me on the spot here. I think Carol Paton explaining the budget and the mess it was this year made so much sense for me. I struggled to completely comprehend how the budget was cancelled and read it again. So you and Carol have such a nice rapport, and I'm looking forward to this episode.
Fantastic. 1 million listens is what we're aiming for by March 2026. Adriaan, thank you so much for this opportunity. I really appreciate it. Let's make this the ultimate premier news podcast that South Africa's ever seen.
Let's go, Graeme. I'll be back at 200.
From Johann Rupert to the Democratic Alliance, we're aware of the most notable South African figures who visited the White House to consult with the Trump administration amid the souring Pretoria-Washington ties. But today we're going to tell you a bit more about a more obscure businessman named Andre Pienaar, whose high-profile dealings in the States have attracted a defamation lawsuit lodged against him by a top US executive.
Because he's played this role, and then this big lawsuit lands, and Andre Pienaar has been claiming that he's a statesman. He's a Mandela was his client. He's a big businessman. When in fact, what Gluck describes him as is a low-level private intelligence operative. He says this guy's made out to be he's somebody that he isn't. And in Gluck's court papers, he then goes into this complete expose of Andre Pienaar's past, and it's interesting, and it's important for us because you've got all of these delegations going over, and all of these people forming relationships with Andre Pienaar, who seems to have not the best interests of South Africa at heart.
Stay tuned for our 100th episode discussion with specialist journalist Carol Paton. Next. Later in the show, the alarms raised on stolen Namibian firearms being smuggled to Cape gangs. And finally, we end off with On This Day in South African History.
Got something to say about this topic? Drop us a short voice note on the Leeds WhatsApp hotline. That's 072 562 3179.
Again, a huge thank you for tuning in to The Lead on this 100th episode, now listened to more than 500,000 times. Please rate us 5 stars and hit like and subscribe on Apple, Spotify and YouTube. My name's Graeme Raubenheimer, this is The Lead, and this is the South African story. Moving to our top story for this Monday, a well-connected South African businessman based out in London with links to the United States is now facing a major defamation lawsuit, itself making many claims about his personal character. Andre Pienaar, an investment firm head who's worn many public hats, met with several anti-ANC groups doing the rounds with the Trump administration this year. Now, though, he's being accused of smearing the name of a top US executive. Well, to tell us more about this intriguing story is our specialist journalist, writer-at-large, Carol Paton. Carol, thank you so much, and welcome to the 100th episode of The Lead, our centenary, if you will.
I'm so excited to be here, and well done. 100 episodes, and you still sound so fresh.
I really appreciate that. We couldn't have had a better guest on for our 100th episode. Thank you so much, Carol. I really appreciate it. This is a rather interesting story, and I think this is not going to be the last time we hear about this. Let's just get this off the bat. Who is this Andre Pienaar fellow? What do we know about him in sort of the public domain before this defamation lawsuit came along?
Right, so Andre Pienaar is an intriguing character. He is South African. He works in London. He lives out of London and Washington. He started off his career as a private intelligence operative working for Kroll Investigations. And one of the things he did early in his career was that he was asked to help by the new democratic government, South African government, to set up. He was asked to help to set up a Scorpion. So he often uses this as his one of his claims to fame, and he's a famous name dropper. So he often talks about Mandela, his client, etc., etc. But he's a guy who's kind of made his fortune out of sort of proximity to powerful individuals, especially in the kind of national security world. He has, though, got an absolute obsession with campaigning against the ANC and ANC policies, and particularly the ANC stance on Gaza. So he has been very active. He was a great friend. He's a friend of Emma Powell, the DA lady who went to the States to lobby against the ANC as well. And he's also
subsequently resigned after the...
And she says she counts him as a friend. And he's also connected with all these other delegations, AfriForum, Solidarity, etc., so business delegations, etc., etc. The reason he's interesting is because he has this particular obsession with South Africa and campaigning, against South Africa's domestic policy. So he's been a key figure because he's connected in Washington. He's been a key figure in all of the information that is going to Donald Trump and so on. And so he kind of came across the radar because the intelligence community here, the State Security Agency, got quite alarmed by Pienaar's interactions with all of these different groups and the role he was playing. And that's one of the things which also kind of put a red flag up with regard to Emma Powell, the DA woman, who subsequently resigned. And there was a lot of heat around her. And I think a lot of the heat came from the fact that she had this very close relationship with Pienaar. So the intelligence community were sort of waving the red flags. And in fact, they did do an intelligence report, which this Wetton then got hold of, which said that, this was all part of a kind of sinister plot, etc., etc. I don't think that's necessarily true, but Andre Pienaar and has been in the spotlight for not very good reasons.
What are the facts? So who does he represent, on a business front at the moment? He's also got this media company that's been especially vocal about News 24, the very organizations you and I represent. What do we know about him?
Andre Pienaar represents himself. He has presented himself as a high-flying businessman, as a statesman, as a very well-connected person. One of the things he did was he started a cybersecurity firm with a big sort of fanfare, got investors, reached a 3 billion rand valuation and then crashed and burned. So that's part of his story. The other part of his story is this role that he plays in putting out information around various global issues, South Africa and the US, and relations between them being one of the key things. And he runs a website which he says is editorially independent, called the National Security News. And the National Security News puts out all sorts of information about South Africa, about South African domestic policies, and even more recently, after we ran a story on Andre about News 24 and how how we're all linked into the kind of security apparatus. So he's kind of...
I'm not part of that WhatsApp group, Carol, so I don't know what you're talking about.
So he kind of is like... It's a misinformation site where he publishes stuff which is conspiracy theories and kind of...
There's a lot of them going around these days,
He's like, I feel he's like, and he'll be upset by this, I know, but I feel he's on his site, on his national security news site, he's a bit of a Bell Pottinger. You know, he's a bit of a let's pump up the propaganda and let's smear this person or that person.
Sure. Okay. And this is, par for the course with the media landscape these days, right? It feels like these things, because of media fluency across the board and pluralism, anybody can really, get the cogs moving and with enough money can, boost posts on X or wherever the case may be, and it will find the necessary sort of outputs that reaches new levels of eyeballs, right?
Exactly.
This is possible these days, and we've covered it extensively on the lead in the past. Okay, so he's met with these anti-ANC groups that have come in and out of Washington. Of course, you've mentioned the DA, AfriForum, I would guess, perhaps Freedom Front Plus, all these guys, although they're part of the GNU, they're still, bringing policies that would be countenance to the ANC. Okay, and
he's put out this sort of stream of negative publicity about South Africa.
You're listening to the latest edition of The Lead on News 24 with Graeme Raubenheimer. If you've got an opinion on what you've heard so far, drop us a short voice note on our WhatsApp hotline. That's 072 562 3179.
This is The Lead. This is the South African story. You tuned into episode 100 of News 24's premier podcast. Let's return to the conversation now with specialist journalist Carol Paton, delving deep now into the crux of our discussion today, the meat and bones of it, if you will. And one of them is about the short lifespan of IronNet. That's essentially what this all sort of circles around.
Yes.
Tell us who essentially is... the person that this top US executive that has led this new defamation lawsuit against Pienaar, Kenneth Gluck, as we understand it, or Gluck. What does this particular defamation case say? And I understand we're going to get into a little bit of the weeds now as to regards to Pienaar's sort of business dealings, right?
You're right, the weeds, because this is a little bit complicated. So you kind of have to bear with me. But he is being sued by the Oracle. Oracle is one of the big, tech multinationals in the US. He's being sued by an Oracle vice president, Kenneth Gluck. The reason why Gluck is suing him is because of various things that Pienaar has said about Gluck. And he's briefed journalists and he's held sort of private press briefings, all to smear Kenneth Gluck. Now, why would he want to smear Kenneth Gluck? So this is where we get into the weeds. When Andre Pienaar's company, IronNet, was investigated by investigative journalists from the Associated Press, he came across, this journalist did a really in-depth, very detailed expose of Pienaar, showing that Pienaar's character was maybe not what investors thought it was, and putting a whole lot of background information into the story about IronNet and why IronNet suddenly crashed. Pienaar then tried to block the publication of the story, and he succeeded for a year by suing the journalist in his personal capacity. But when they got to the point of the court case where there's discovery, in other words, you now got to give me all your documents,
Right.
and I'm going to give you mine.
This is when the prosecution's building a case,
Yes,
right?
and they got to the point of discovery, and then Andre Pienaar suddenly said, okay, I'm not going to pursue this case, which obviously meant he didn't want to, he didn't want anyone to see all his accounts and documents and, statements from INET. So the journalist then published the story. On the day after or very soon after the story was published about INET, Pienaar then held these sessions, these private briefing sessions with journalists, and he smeared Gluck, and he gave them all sorts of information that was untrue. Gluck says in his court papers that he knowingly misled people. He knowingly spread misinformation. And Gluck's argument is that Pienaar did this in order to distract attention from this very negative article about INET. So Pienaar was saying, listen guys, this stuff around INET, actually it's all coming from this guy, Kenneth Gluck. It's all his agenda. He's got a beef with me. I don't know why. But this guy's really not on the level. And this is the issue that Gluck is now taking up. He's saying, okay, well, I'm going to sue you for saying all of those things about me.
But Gluck was looking closer at one aspect of Pienaar's dealings, right? And this was a questionable acquisition of a certain advisory firm, right? And so Gluck has basically stated that that's the
Yes.
crux of this in-depth matter as to why there's the standoff that is now occurring, right?
Yes, so now we get into more weeds, and you've got to bear with me again, okay?
It's worth it,
Because how this all began, the root of why Pienaar does not like Gluck, why he went for Gluck, and why this whole animosity between them developed, was that at a certain stage, Pienaar had a very close relationship with a woman who ran a private, public relations firm. And this woman's client was Amazon. Now, she was lobbying the Department of Defense for Amazon to get this very big $10 billion cloud computing contract. This was her client, and she was lobbying them. A little bit later, what happens is she then sells her firm, and she joins the Department of Defense, where she then starts lobbying from within the Department of Defense, positioning herself to say, Amazon should get this contract, etc. She claims to have sold her company when she did that, and therefore she had no conflict of interest. But she didn't disclose who she sold it to. Okay.
And then, as I understand, Watchname then has a media interview and gets asked about whether or not Pienaar has any claim to buying this company, and he actually says no,
yes.
right?
So what Gluck does, Gluck is obviously a competitor. Oracle also wants that contract, just like Amazon wants it. So Gluck digs into this thing, and he discovers, her firm, Donnelly, her name is Donnelly, Donnelly's firm has been bought by somebody called Andre Pienaar in a very opaque series of transactions. And it's not very clear. Pienaar is then asked on television, like on some live interview, he's asked, did you buy Donnelly's company? And he says, I did not buy Donnelly's company. Later, Gluck manages to get all the public documents which show that he did, in fact. Not only that, Pienaar was also in business with Amazon. And he was also seen to be in a very close sort of circle of people with Donnelly. So there were conflicts of interest all over this thing. And a lot of the investigative journalists were digging into this big contract and why was it going to go to Amazon, and they weren't really putting it out to tender. And there was a lot of heat around this thing, and that's where Pienaar got in Gluck's crosshairs, because he was clearly the other part of facilitating this thing by buying the company and then claiming he hadn't bought it because he was in business with Amazon. Anyway, long story short, so Gluck takes this information and he's presenting it to oversight bodies in Washington, D.C. and to opinion makers and so on, and telling them this is actually what the deal is with this big cloud computing contract. In a completely unrelated development, Pienaar's doing his own thing with IronNet. Okay, this investigative journalist is working away on IronNet and Pienaar, and he eventually then publishes his story. And Pienaar is exposed as having run this, what they call the biggest sort of flame out in cyber security history. It was just a complete crash of this $3 billion firm. That's when Pienaar says, okay, fine, I'm going after Gluck. Gluck has done this, and he gets all the journalists together.
Right.
And he says, okay, this is who's behind this, which Gluck says is just absolute nonsense. He had nothing to do with IronNet, but he was just busy. All he wanted to do was expose the thing that was happening with the DoD and the conflict of interest that had happened there over this cloud computing contract. So do
we know the motive with Gluck? Why he did that? Is it just because he felt like it was the right thing to do?
No. I mean, he is a vice president of Oracle. So Oracle would be a competitor to Amazon. So what seemed to be happening, although no one really spells it out, what seems to be happening is that there was some kind of deal, Department of Defense and Amazon, that there was some kind of deal that somehow, it actually happens in America, just like it happens here. There's that contract had Amazon's name written on it. And the competitors, of which Gluck's firm would be one, were unhappy. And so that's why there was all of this people digging into the story. And eventually the Department of Defense cloud computing contract wasn't awarded. Because there'd just been so much heat, and it was clear that there was something rotten here.
Let's go out of the weeds a little bit.
Yeah.
We need to get to the crux of so what? Okay. What does this mean to the South African, right? So let's come out to first what the defamation lawsuit says about Pienaar's character. I thought that was quite interesting. Okay. What does Gluck say about what type of person he thinks Pienaar is? Okay,
so coming out of the weeds now, going back to big picture. We're not really interested in IronNet, and actually not even that interested in Andre Pienaar himself. But what happens, because he's played this role, and then this big lawsuit lands, and Andre Pienaar has been claiming that he is somebody, he's a statesman, he's a Mandela was his client, he's a big businessman, when in fact what Gluck describes him as, which is really lovely, is a low-level private intelligence operative. He says this guy's made out to be he's somebody that he isn't. And in Gluck's court papers, he then goes into this complete expose of Andre Pienaar's past. And it's interesting, and it's important for us because you've got all of these delegations going over, and all of these people forming relationships with Andre Pienaar, who seems to have not the best interests of South Africa at heart.
Carol, from what I'm getting from everything, to me, reading your piece entitled, and it's still doing fairly well on our front page of News 24 Business today, top US exec exposes dealings of anti-SA campaigner in damning court papers. What I'm sort of taking away from it is finally we get to see sort of more of the background figures within upper echelons of political power. One being the Washington, D.C. Here's a prominent South African figure who is perhaps not public-facing in the sense of we know it, whether that's a political party. Here is somebody sort of operating in the background, now being brought to the fore by a particular court case that is now shedding a lot more light on who this person is and what their motives might be. That's what I'm sort of taking away from this entire conversation, is that it's sort of adding to the intrigue of how we understand South Africa operates abroad, not from a sort of government perspective, but more from a private one. Do I have that correctly?
You have that correctly. And I think that what is interesting is that, I think for many of us, the sudden focus that Donald Trump took and to put, to put South Africa in the crosshairs and say, I'm going for these racists, I'm going for these people, I'm going to take them down, starts to make sense when you look at sort of some of the players involved and who was saying what and who was doing what in that context.
So a lot more possibly to come out of this. I think this is potentially a very convoluted, complicated entry point into possibly a larger understanding down the line, right?
Yeah, and geopolitics, and especially when it comes to the national security aspect of it, is very tricky. It's very shadowy, and you never really know the full story.
Thanks so much for joining us on episode 100 of The Lead.
I loved it. Thanks, Graeme.
Trending topic.
To our trending topic now, and if you're wondering how the country's gangs are getting their guns these days, the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organised Crime now reports that 9 people appeared in a Windhoek court last month, accused of stealing several weapons from a military stockpile in Namibia and trying to smuggle them across the border. The organisation says one way criminals are smuggling firearms like AK-47s to South Africa is by hiding them amongst flour and fruit shipments via delivery trucks. A cache of Namibian police pistols destined for Mzansi was uncovered during a routine traffic stop in 2020. But it's understood that this smuggling's been happening since at least 2016, and one of the 9 who had appeared in court recently is said to be an employee of a South African trucking company. The initiative adds that although no one gang claims the right to run this particular Namibia to South Africa smuggling route, it's understood that the Junkie Funky Kids, or JFKs, and the Six Bobs gangs have allegedly been receiving these stolen firearms. The full story's still trending on News 24's front page. And finally, ending off on this day in history, the 8th of September 1998. 8 former apartheid policemen, including the former police commissioner, Lieutenant General Johann Rupert, former hit squad commander Eugene de Kock, as well as former intelligence agent Craig Williamson, applied for amnesty before the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's Amnesty Committee for their Dirty Tricks campaign against liberation organizations, in particular the ANC. During their application, Coetzee outlined a plot to bomb ANC offices in London in 1982 with the knowledge of Minister of Law and Order Louis Lagrange. This was in retaliation for the 1981 bombing of the Voortrekkershoogte military base in Pretoria, and to show their dissatisfaction to the United Kingdom government for allowing the ANC and SACP to operate freely in their country despite their communist ideologies. Williamson expressed regret for having killed Jeanette Squirn and her 6-year-old daughter in Angola. Williamson was also responsible for the parcel letter bomb that killed ANC activist Ruth First, wife of Joe Slovo. De Kock regretted all the atrocities and murders he committed whilst attached to Vlakplaas, and maintained that former state presidents F.W. de Klerk and P.W. Botha had a full knowledge of what was happening at the time. The members of Squirn and First families opposed the amnesty application of Williamson and other policemen. That's courtesy South African History Online on this day in history, the 8th of September 1998. Remember the line to send us any of your voice notes on anything you've heard in today's edition. You can send that through to 072 562 3179. My name's Graeme Raubenheimer, and so long as there's trusted news first, we'll always have the lead.